next conservative civil war is here, and it's being led by Zoomers. Whoa, Brigham, are the kids okay? Brigham, what is going on, my man? So what's going on? Is it like Candace Owens has gone anti-Semitic and now the right has to choose? The average Gen Zer has to figure out whether he hates or doesn't hate Israel? Like, what's going on, man?
So over the course of these more than a dozen interviews I did with some fairly prominent Gen Z conservatives and others who are kind of just in the grassroots space, they all said affordability is like the top issue for them. And that comes to home ownership, different things like this.
Boy, do I identify with the latter. I think half the reason why so many people think Nick Fuentes is funny is because Gen Z has the darkest humor on the planet. And they are all internet trolls. This episode is brought to you by Tiny 3D Temples. For more information on Tiny 3D Temples, make sure you guys visit the link in the description. All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to Ward Radio. I am your host, Cardon Ellis, and today I'm actually joined via Zoom by a friend and contributor, none other than Brigham Tomko of Deseret News here, who's just written a really intriguing and interesting article that we're going to be covering in the Deseret News. Apparently, young conservatives are breaking hard with their boomer countertops. Oh, wow, yeah, they're rebelling on the countertops, bro. What can I say? With their counterparts, I should say. Gen Z is breaking hard with traditional, shall we say, conservatism. And the headline on his article literally says, "Are young conservatives okay where Gen Z is taking the American right?" I love this subheadline that the next conservative civil war is here, and it's being led by Zoomers. Whoa, Brigham, are the kids okay? Brigham, what is going on, my man? Talk to us.
Well, hey, Cardon, thanks for having me again. And this story actually starts where you and I left off last time I was on the show back in September, and that's tragically with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. But what that moment did is kind of shine a spotlight on Gen Z conservatives. And I think in the months since, we've seen something of a civil war or a fracturing among the American political right. And the focus has been Gen Z, or those voters that are that were born between 1997 and 2012. And the interesting thing that, I think we could dive into, or one of the things we could explore, is that one of the guys at the center of this, kind of explosion in conservative media is a BYU grad named Ryan Newhouse. And so there's lots of interesting kind of Utah ties in this story. I talked to over a dozen Gen Z conservatives, lots of them members of the church, about where the conservative movement is heading.
Wow. Okay. So talk to me, man. I can read the article here to our audience, but you got to give me the skinny here. You said, very interestingly, high school and college students dressed in a blend of Sunday best and Republican red strained to hear the words bouncing off the marble walls in the Utah Capitol Rotunda. Man, I swear, you write like the Atlantic. Like, you're like those artsy New York Times guys that always starts out with I could hear the thundering of the protesters from a quarter mile away before the shaking in my boots was felt, and I saw the first man with his Molotov cocktail right there. They always paint the scene. I like it, bro. It's good. So what's going on? Is it like Candace Owens has gone anti-Semitic and now the right has to choose? The average Gen Zer has to figure out whether he hates or doesn't hate Israel? Like, what's going on, man?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you mentioned Israel, because so much of this piece touches on the fact that these younger voters have, a majority of them have split from previous generations on that issue precisely of Israel. But where you started out reading in that article, that was kind of me painting the scene, right, with all my beautiful descriptive language of the Utah Capitol Rotunda back in October on what would have been Charlie Kirk's 32nd birthday, where you have one BYU student named Aubrey Hudson, and she's the chair of the Turning Point USA chapter, which is Charlie Kirk's organization for BYU students. And she was there saying that Gen Z was going to rebuild the conservative movement with this very optimistic vision. So I chose to start the story with her and end the story with her for kind of a hopeful kind of outlook. But so much of the polling data, like I mentioned, and these conversations I had, show that Latter-day Saint conservatives, and they're reflective of their generation more broadly, are much more skeptical of America's relationship with Israel. And in some cases that bleeds into a different, conception of the Jewish people and where they fit into the American project. And so that was something that to some might be kind of concerning, and kind of an interesting thing for us as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because we're a religious minority, that haven't always been treated kindly by the majority, conservative, liberal, or otherwise in the country, so.
Okay, so I'm actually really glad here that you talked about something you mentioned here in the article. You start the article talking about Aubrey in the off-campus chapter of Turning Point USA at Brigham Young University, which, by the way, still kind of bothers me. Like, how could they not get an official chapter? Like, there's one at UVU. They're a legitimate 501c3. Like, the fact that UVU could have one and BYU couldn't, that always has kind of like rubbed me wrong. And I would like to get to the bottom of that and know a little bit more. But something that I've noticed, and you seem to touch on in this article, is Charlie Kirk's assassination. Tim Pool said this, and I haven't been able to get this out of my mind. Charlie Kirk's assassination was one of the most effective assassinations of all time, if not for sure my adult lifetime. Because it really worked. And I don't think we realized as Americans how much Charlie Kirk was a finger in the dike of like old conservative beefs in the conservative movement. Like within 36 hours of Charlie Kirk being shot, Mark Driscoll, anti-Mormon Protestant minister, has released an entire book on why Mormons aren't Christians. And as much as he wants to scream from the rooftops that it was just, kind of AI assisted authorship and that his interns did it, because so many people were asking questions about Tyler Robinson that he just had to produce a book on how Mormons aren't Christians. My BS meter was going through the roof. That book had existed for years. And the only reason it wasn't published was because Charlie Kirk was there saying, whoa, hold on. Before you go all anti-Mormon, I don't agree with their theology either, but they really do help in Arizona, which is a swing state. You know what I'm saying? And they're really not that bad people. So he had an amazingly, as much as he was like lampooned as a firebrand and a polemicist, he was like a cool cream in the hot coffee of a very factional conservative movement. And I'm sorry, but it was a rude awakening for members of the church to realize just how much people on the right hate them too. Like, in the absence of woke, the right will stab you in the back. And the proof is Grand Blanc, Michigan. We survived 40 years of woke without having an equivalent mass shooting in a chapel. We didn't survive 4 months of post-woke before the right wing, inspired by people like Mark Driscoll, were all of a sudden shooting us. So part of the reason why that happened, and there's so much right-wing animus towards not just Israel and Jews, but also Mormons, is because Charlie Kirk is gone. That's why it's the most effective assassination out there, because Turning Point USA, the organization that probably single-handedly not single-handedly, but like heavy-handedly assisted Donald Trump in his major victories, is now leaderless, and I won't say impotent, but not a shred of what it used to be. And that's because Charlie is gone, but also he's not able to corral and herd the cats of the conservative movement. And now they're eating each other, whether it's Candace Owens saying it's Egyptians one day or French legionnaires the other day, or whether it's the Protestants trying to say that Mormons aren't Christians, or whether it's the people that can't figure out whether or not they liked or disliked Mitt Romney. I've never seen the conservative movement more fractured than it is right now. And I kind of lay a lot of that at the feet of the absence of Charlie Kirk. Am I wrong?
I think lots of people have arrived in the same spot you have. I have heard that very consistently throughout my conversations with people who are kind of in that more intellectual conservative movement space, as well as people who are in the grassroots or people who are Gen Z conservatives kind of getting into politics for the first time. And you touch on something really interesting that I started to pick up on when I was profiling Charlie, and then as I've been writing these pieces in the aftermath of his assassination, it just emerged so clearly that the thing that differentiated him from basically every other person in that conservative pundit talking head space is he was building an infrastructure for political victories in the future. So he had something real and physical outside of that social media environment. And in addition to that, he cared about a coalition. He cared about binding people together from different parts of the conservative movement to change the culture in the country. So that means he was really focused on building things, even if that meant kind of horse trading, with different parts of the movement, as opposed to just ideological purity. And so what that meant is that he cared a lot about guardrails, whether it came to what he said or what beliefs he espoused or who he allowed to come to his events, which had become the biggest events in the conservative movement, but also just on a principle basis. He was very principled when it came to things like anti-Semitism. I mean, just the last few months of his life, he had multiple Q&As with students where he called he referred to some of these ideas being laundered on the American right by folks like Candace Owens or Nick Fuentes as Jew hate, and he said that it came from the pit of hell. He said that we should not allow it into the conservative movement.
The pit of hell.
That was a phrase he liked to use.
So if he were Mormon, he'd be burying his testimony saying it's with every fiber of his being. I mean, that's wow, okay.
Every fiber of his being. It was interesting. When I was at his Student Action Summit in Florida in July, a student asked him whether he thought that Israel was behind 9/11, and Charlie Kirk stopped him and said, "I think that's insane," and just cut it off right there. And so he was able to impose those guardrails. And what we've seen, since he was killed, is that the mainstream pundits and influencers on the right among Gen Z, they have no interest in setting those guardrails. And so you see, in my personal life, I have a close family member whose number one source of content is Candace Owens.
Oh, dude.
Right? and this person is 21, and they're a close family member. And I mean, it's just something that the reason
I don't get the Mormons that take Candace Owens so seriously. Do you know how many members of the church I talk to that they'll just say like, oh, well, like a week after they swore that it was the Egyptian plane, they swore that it was French legionnaires. Then they swore that it was Israel, and all of a sudden they were JFK experts. And now this week they're talking to me about how it for sure is Mossad, and they know, well, because Candace this, Candace that, and I'll tell them, I'll be like, she literally said that Mormons and the Deseret bee was like a Polish underground communist symbol from the 20s. Yet we all know that's garbage and she's totally wrong. And it's Ether's Deseret from the Book of Mormon. Like left, right, or center, if you're Utah and you know that Deseret Publishing and Deseret Bank and Deseret Laundry Services and Deseret, landscaping isn't because we're invoking the hoorah of 1920s Polish communism. It's because of the Mormon heritage of the beehive of Deseret in the Book of Ether. It's like when you go to Tennessee and there's like, or you go to Kentucky and there's Cassius Clay watering hole and Muhammad Ali, restaurant or whatever. It's because that's a national hero of that area. He was from Louisville, so everything in Louisville is named after him. That's the way it is in Utah. So like even members of our church, where I can just like show them how she said something just demonstrably fake, false, and knucking futs. They'll be like, oh yeah, well she was wrong on that, but she's for sure right that it was Mossad, and I can't believe I thought we were better than this, Brigham. I thought we were better.
I mean, you point out an interesting thing is that this is a social media phenomenon. It's not a Gen Z phenomenon, right? And so this is something that definitely affects people who are much older than that Gen Z demographic. But I think one reason to focus on Gen Z when it comes to influencers like Candace Owens is there was a Pew Research poll that I cite in this article that shows that over the course of the past, I think 4 years, the percent of Gen Z that gets their news from TikTok went from 9% to 43%.
What?
So we have 4 out of 10 people, in my age range and a little bit younger who get their news primarily from TikTok.
Oh my gosh, I'm looking this up right now. It's more Americans view Jews, mainline Protestants, and Catholics favorably than unfavorably. Oh, no, that's a different picture. Here's the other graph. Oh, no. Sorry, these are different graphs. I'm going to pull up the article that you mentioned. While I'm pulling that up, I just have to tell you, what's the effect? There's actually a name for it. It's not the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's a different effect where when we read the newspaper, things that we're knowledgeable about that are reported incorrectly, we'll recognize it and say, oh, this is incorrect reporting. But then when we read an article about something we're not knowledgeable about, we'll assume that the reporting's correct. There's a name for that effect. What's the name of that effect? Come on, you went to journalism school, man.
I have no idea.
Oh, I took a screenshot of it. I'll have to look it up. So anyway, I'm 14 minutes in. I've broken the number one rule. I've buried the lead. You invoked the term a civil war amongst Gen Z conservatives. So what are the factions of the civil war and what are they warring about?
So there's a number of key issues where Gen Z conservatives say that they differ from previous generations. And some of it is positive and super understandable in the economic and cultural moment we're in. So over the course of these more than a dozen interviews I did with some fairly prominent Gen Z conservatives and others who are kind of just in the grassroots space, they all said affordability is like the top issue for them. And that comes to home ownership, different things like this. And this is true across the country, but in Utah, I think and in California, right, felt especially strongly. And that ties to the American dream and this idea of starting a family young, having a home. And so that's really threatened, and that's a priority when it comes to their politics. And so oftentimes they'll link that priority to an America First kind of approach where they're like, let's just focus on these domestic problems. And that leads to like an intense skepticism of foreign aid, foreign conflict. But where we see so much of Gen Z differing from previous generations, and this is one of like the starkest numbers, is we see that just over the last 3 years, young voters have gone from being around 30% unfavorable views towards Israel to 50%. So half of Gen Z has an unfavorable view toward Israel, toward helping them, and lots of that extends towards views towards the Israeli people. And in that time, older voters, this is usually split into like below 50 and 50 and above, they've stayed the same, where only 20% of them have an unfavorable view toward Israel. And so I think that's a point of valid debate, whether we should be sending our resources over to another country. But so much of this conversation, like you said, among Gen Z is being driven by figures like Candace Owens, who seem to have an agenda that goes beyond just foreign aid, right? It has to do with the Jewish people and how you define being an American and things like this. And we see that kind of language all the time in influencers like Tucker Carlson as well. And then someone that older voters might have not been familiar with, but is popping up in Gen Z's algorithm and feed all the time, is a guy named Nick Fuentes, who has kind of burst into the mainstream since Tucker Carlson interviewed him in October. And he's one of these figures that represents something that some conservatives think is kind of like a warning sign, like a crisis that could be bubbling up in the party. So,
and dude, okay, so with Nick Fuentes, so first off, virtue signaling disclaimer. I'm not, Nick Fuentes bad right away. Okay, so that's said. So now we can actually talk and learn. All right, but like, dude. First off, Nick Fuentes rehabilitated his image with one racist rant against black people overnight, and it was wild. Like about 3 months ago, just Google Nick Fuentes black people gray Nissan or whatever, okay? And he did this rant about how most people aren't actually racist. They just don't like it when they see an African American behaving badly in X, Y, or Z ways. And then he just names a bunch of stereotypical things that he sees that he thinks is bad behavior that most people identify with. And he rehabilitated his image freaking overnight. Like, I thought he was going to die as the poster boy anti-Semite and the untouchable anti-Semite of the internet. I thought he was going to just live there forever until he does this rant. And so many black TikTokers so many black X.com accounts, so many big black YouTubers reacted to it saying, holy crap, this was hilarious and true. So many black people said it's true, that he went from being untouchable to all of a sudden like legitimate commentator if he promises not to use the N-word on the PBD podcast. Like, I'm not kidding you, within a 2 or 3 week period. And so what's so interesting about Nick Fuentes is, I haven't been following him, but I've been aware of him for a long time, because when I did Problem Solver Politics, my assistant, who is just a child born of the internet, said, dude, this guy's got talent and he's coming up. Watch this America First podcast. I guarantee you he is not going to die in obscurity, right? And that was when he was just pro-Trump, not anti-Israel. And I'm like, okay, cool. The guy can actually live stream for 3 hours by himself and carry a conversation, has personality. Okay, yeah, he's got talent. What I notice is he is a perfect example of why boomers are losing Gen Z. The interview that he had with Piers Morgan. Did you see the interview with Nick Fuentes and Piers Morgan?
I just saw clips.
You just saw clips. Okay.
Yeah.
I can see why Gen Z youth are so enamored of Nick Fuentes. I can see why the boomers mistake a lot of what they view as funny and humorous and edgy as anti-Semitism or racism, but they commit the error of wanting to turn around and shame the people for listening and lecture them about the Holocaust or this or that, when at the end of the day, these are people that are struggling, staring down the barrel of a lifetime of inaffordability. You know, if you want to stop the Nick Fuenteses of the world and the ideology that you think that he represents, what you need to do is actually attack the affordability crisis that is uniting people behind him, and not what you think he's inspiring other people to think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so 2 things there. One is I have another close family member who I won't provide any identifying information for, who told me something that is very, I think, applicable to Gen Z. He's like, I don't necessarily agree with Nick Fuentes' views, but he's super funny and he's really entertaining. And like you said, something that I think goes missed by older generations is that almost 90% of the time Nick Fuentes is trolling, right? Like he's joking, he's being ironic, but he's also saying things he actually believes. And so he has like this case for like plausible deniability, like, I was just joking. But I mean, you tune in for a show for 5 minutes and he really does believe that white Christian men deserve to run America and they should kind of be endorsed.
Oh no, he's a white Christian nationalist. Like, let's make no bones about it. And the things he said about Mormons are heinous, right?
Yeah.
At the same token though, I just think that in a similar vein to Andrew Tate, in a similar vein to almost all the red pill guys, there's like that 90% that's true, that are things nobody else is talking about and you're not allowed to say. And I'm not talking about the Jews. I'm saying, like, for example, here's a typical Andrew Tate rant. You know, guys are getting screwed. And you know what? They are. Feminism has turned into man-hating 101, and it's been that way for 20 or 30 years, and you're not allowed to say it in college campus or else they flunk you. But all the kids that are on college campuses feel it. So when Andrew Tate comes out and says, hey, guys are getting screwed and feminism is a bunch of man-hating, we all say, yeah, go Andrew Tate. He's saying things that can't be said. Okay, cool. And then he goes even further. He says, and divorce laws are against men. And then he talks about examples of divorce laws where people got screwed. And guess what? You, Brigham, me, Cardon, we all know friends that got screwed by bad divorce laws, where vindictive women have leveraged the state against them so they can't visit their children with lies that won't get cleared up for 9 months and 10 grand worth of lawyers that that they end up having to pay because they're the man, right? And so man, Andrew Tate, he's 2 for 2. And we all say, yeah, so Andrew Tate. He says, and you know what else? Men are victims of homelessness disproportionately. Yay, 3 for 3. And men are 98% of all prison inmates. Yeah, 4 for 4. And we got to fight for our rights. There needs to be men's rights. Okay, he's 5 for 5, which means you should have sex with women regularly without giving any kind of emotional backing, and therefore have a Rolodex full of 30 or 40 women disobeying the law of chastity, which is an outdated social construct. Whoa! You know what I'm saying? It's that 6 for 6 thing that is the toxic pill, right? But he's getting so much attention because he says the 5 out of 5 first that are true. And they're all things that are not affecting boomers, but are destroying Gen Z's future. As a millennial man, I've never had more friends that have been working consistently in 6-figure income jobs in Hollywood, gaffers, editors, television directors, sound engineers, colorists. I've never had more friends working full-time for longer, making 6-figure incomes that still don't qualify for an entry-level house. And because they don't qualify for an entry-level house and they can't afford a loan on a house, it slowed their ability to self-perceive as a man that could get married and have children. And because they're not getting married and not having children, they don't have as much meaning in their life, and their life darkens. They're not as happy. And then when they come out and they hear just endless lecturing from boomers saying, well, you failed to launch. When I was your age, I had 3 kids in a house. Well, you know, you really should save, Steven. Dude, there's nothing left to save. You can make 6-figure income in Los Angeles and literally be paycheck to paycheck buying food on credit cards until your next paycheck, okay? And you can't afford the house that costs $950,000 that's 800 square feet that some boomer bought in the 60s for 2 cents and then sold for $2 million, you know? Like, and that as a man grinds you to your core. And then when you're not allowed to say anything about it, you see no hope of anybody coming to save you or address it. That's the most frustrating thing to your core. It hurts you to your core. And then when you see, like, I watched that Nick Fuentes interview with Piers Morgan, and I don't know, like, Nick Fuentes said that it's the most asinine take that he knew was going to get him in trouble or something like that, saying, I don't know, it was like Hitler was cool or something stupid like that. I know he said like he was a fan of Stalin or something. Like, there's a part of me that says, F you, dude. Half my family was killed by Stalin. You know, like, I have Polish ancestors that were literally worked to death in Siberian labor camps, you know, and I want to say F you to that, right? But at the same token, I recognize that for the younger generation, completely detached, not completely, but far more detached from World War II, okay, that may not resonate as deeply. And I will do better explaining who Stalin was and how he killed half of my family and how that actually deeply interrupted a bloodline and a good thing than I will by taking a boomer named Finkelstein, which is just like stepping on a landmine with an anti-Semite, you know, and then just having that person lecture him about why he's wrong, because at the end of the day, left, right, or center, Gen Z feels like they have been screwed by the older generation. So when the older generation starts to lecture, it falls completely on deaf ears, and you get the reverse of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Now you have to keep the nasty bathwater with the baby, because you're lecturing young people on things that just don't want to listen to you because you've made their life miserable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, social media has made it impossible for institutions to gatekeep or control the narrative. And so older generations have to realize that they just cannot take for granted some of those arguments or positions that for so long were just the default. And like every other opinion was taboo because social media has disrupted all that. But that being said, I think lots of the Gen Z folks I talked to, they did say there are these material factors that make people more open to the arguments Nick Fuentes makes, which, and I'm not exaggerating, I've tuned into Nick Fuentes and listened to his live stream and researched him. If you just tune in, at any given day, 9 out of 10 times, he's going to be saying that the reason why Gen Z is disenchanted and that the United States has all the problems it does is because of a Jewish conspiracy. And until Jews are removed from the halls of government, we'll be enslaved. Like, that's almost a direct quote from what I heard 5 nights ago when I tuned in. And so, like, let me just like respond to that a little bit and hear your thoughts on this, because beyond these like material factors of housing, healthcare, tuition costs, which have all outpaced the median household income by a lot, there's also a much deeper, I think, spiritual rot where like these young people, they are failing to discern truth versus falsehood, good versus evil, and the social media space is totally taking advantage of that. I mean, just algorithms boosting the worst ideas. And, you know, something that I heard from a couple of these sources I talked to, one of them, who is a Latter-day Saint, a BYU student with a big following on social media, he made the point that, hey, right-wing identity politics, kind of the mere reverse of what we saw during the great, you know, awakening in 2020, that's a way for young white men to stand up for themselves. And I get what you were saying, like this is in response to people saying we need anti-racist discrimination against white people.
For 30 years, they've said white Christian men are the root of all problems. Literally, the basis of the academic term intersectionality was this idea that different minority groups would have to band together to fight the common evil that is suppressing them. Wow, okay. What common evil?
But
what suppression? And it was the white man. So it's like when you vilify white men, especially white Christian men, for 30 years as like the de facto bad person that you can just flail no matter what. It's like Nazis in cinema almost. If you ever need a bad guy that's just like, is okay to kill and nobody thinks twice about it, it's like, just make him a Nazi, you know? And then now all of a sudden, like, nobody in the audience is going to say, well, should we have really iced that guy? No, everybody thinks, okay, cool. It was a German from 1939. It's okay, because they are the people we all agree are just universally bad. It's almost like the perfect melodramatic character, right? Well, the perfect melodramatic bad guy from 1993 to 2023 was the white Christian male. So even the guys over at Evergreen College, even the Weinstein brothers said, I don't feel comfortable with all of this anti-white Christian male rhetoric, because if you want to create right-wing white Christian male violence and nationalism real fast, vilify it for 30 years straight.
Yeah.
Enter Nick Fuentes.
Yeah, and this right-wing identitarianism that I agree sprouted up as a reaction to that kind of identity politics on the left for a long time. It's scapegoating Jews and Jewish people. And, you know, people can, like, I'm not trying to paint with a broad brush anyone or call anyone anti-Semitic, but if you talk to these members of Gen Z, like my loved one who listens to Candace Owens for most of their opinions and influence, this person told me, straight-faced, Mossad is running our government, right? And so I just think that you know, without applying labels or condemning an entire generation, while also understanding their grievances and everything that they're going through and dealing with, right? I'm 26. I have 3 kids under 5. I'm in a 2-bedroom apartment. I'd love if housing was more affordable, but that doesn't mean, oh, I get to blame the Jews then for the housing market, right? You know, so
but it's like not the Jews. It's just Bibi Netanyahu. You know, that's.
So that there has to be a way where the conservative movement can draw lines without alienating the Gen Z conservatives that are rising up, you know, in the ranks. And so I don't know the answer to how they do that. That was kind of what this piece was exploring, is how do you kind of grapple with those underlying issues while also drawing some line in the sand that some of these influencers that Charlie Kirk left in his wake are not willing to do.
Professor Tomko, will you pick me? Pick me?
Cardon, go ahead.
Okay, cool. First off, I agree with you, and I think your observation is very astute. But I feel like, see, I've been to Israel, even in the past year, like very recently, I've gone there. And 2 things become very, very apparent fast. These people are fighting for their lives over there, and they need as many allies as they can have. And the anti-Semitism is very, very real, and it's on steroids in the Middle East. And the fear that they have is not a persecution complex. It is legitimate. It is legitimate. And as evidenced by what just happened in Australia a day ago, or today, I should say, it's within the past 24 hours. That becomes readily apparent on day one. Okay. And on day two, you realize, oh my gosh, the Jewish people as a whole and the state of Israel as a whole suffers from the exact same ailment that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Mormons worldwide suffer from. And it's the following. I think from probably around 1965, when the true horrors of the Holocaust were finally made manifest to a worldwide audience, and the world kind of actually fully understood the extent of the Holocaust. The books were written about the Nazis that were finally captured, and then the data from the Soviet Union was actually finally confirmed, and you know, the world really kind of grasped what the Holocaust was. From 1965 to probably about 2005, maybe even 2015, I'd say, the world kind of collectively agreed you can't criticize Israel without coming across as anti-Semitic. And like the Holocaust was just like so bad that, you know, you're not going to get away with, you know, like they just, it was so anathematized, anti-Semitism, that anything that smacked of it remotely was just like hands off. And because of that, Jews in the West kind of forgot how to philosophically fight their philosophical defenses. It's just like in anti-Mormonism. We're very familiar with a lot of the accusations. Oh, Joseph Smith was a false prophet because Kinderhook plates. No, slow your roll. Kinderhook plates, that's a false narrative. All right, he never said he could translate them, and he donated them to the Antiquarian Society. You know, these claims that you're reading and quoting are like third generation sources from fourth generation anti-Mormons. Like, we're kind of familiar with the table tennis that is anti-Mormonism. You know, here's the top 5 issues evangelicals will bring up. Here's the top 5 issues that ex-Mormon anti-Mormons will bring up. Here's the top 5 issues that atheistic anti-Mormons will bring up. And we're kind of familiar with the top 5 rebuttals as well, enough that we feel comfortable in our position philosophically as members of the church. All right. Well, I think a lot of the diaspora of Israel, and even a lot of Israel itself, got just kind of comfortable in that. Hey guys, we're going to pause this video really fast to highlight one of our longtime sponsors, Scripture Notes. Scripture Notes is an online scripture reading tool that not only helps us here financially, keeping the lights on in the Ward Radio studio, but they assist us with an AI tool named Daniel, helping us find oftentimes the scriptures we're looking for on the fly when we're doing our debunkings or we're preparing for any of our presentations and so on and so forth. They also provide us with a lot of giveaways for the program and listeners like you. So thank you very much, Scripture Notes, for your generosity. They help us delight in truth, denounce deception, and have fun. And we are grateful for their sponsorship. For more information on Scripture Notes, please make sure you guys check out the links in the description. And so they kind of forgot how to fight and explain and to wrestle philosophically with why there actually needs to be, you know, a Jewish state philosophically, or why there actually needs to be, you know, a homeland for the ethnic or the or the political Jews or whatever. You know, they're 5, 5, and 5. They kind of forgot to fight. And the Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints, we kind of have the same problem too. Like, in our wealth, like Brigham Young, he succeeded. He took us from being a persecuted minority that literally had an extermination order against it and was at war with the U.S. government to being the state in the union that was the #1 for business 3 years in a row. Like major corporations were no longer manufacturing guns to destroy Mormons, but were moving factories there. The government that once upon a time was at war with us is now building giant NSA like data farms and putting them in our backyard. Like, we're one of the happiest states in the union when it comes to wealth. But in our wealth, we forgot our heritage. We stood on the shoulders of giants and thought we were flying, and we forgot the reasons why we did everything. Our wealth caught up with us, and so we forgot how to fight. That's why 66% of millennials are all inactive, because we never adapted to social media. That's another thing. Jewish social media sucks. There's individual Jews that defend Israel better than Israel itself defends itself. And forget Mormon social media. Have you seen young men worldwide? It's horrible. It's no good. And so it's like, I bristle when I hear young Gen Z say that they love Nick Fuentes and that with a straight face, they think what Candace Owens says is real and that Mossad killed Charlie Kirk. Like, the evidence just does not bear that out. However, at the same time, I don't slight them for thinking that, because, and I don't slight them for sometimes going inactive or thinking incorrect historical things about the church, because on their scroll on TikTok, the anti-Mormon church showed up 50 times that day, but the pro-Mormon church didn't show up 50 times in their lifetime ever. So it's like, I want to correct you and I want to defend my faith. With Israel, it's like, I'm not even some pro-Israel guy. I'm actually neutral Israel. But I'm stuck in that position where, like Donald Trump in 2016, where like the media ad nauseum would say on loop, Donald Trump thinks Nazis are very fine people. And I'd be like, oh, well, wait, hold on a second. Okay. He didn't actually say, what are you, pro-Trump? No, I'm not pro-Trump, but it's actually not about Trump. It's just about correct history. He said there's very fine people on both sides of the arguments of statues. Like, go back and read the tape. Oh, you must be MAGA. Well, this is why we can't have nice things. You know, so it's that way with Israel. It's that way with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Like, yeah, I can't stand the crap that Nick Fuentes says. I can't stand the crap that Candace Owens says. But I don't slight Gen Z for believing it, because the people that have the real facts just refuse to adapt to social media. They utterly refuse to modernize. And I just have to throw my hands up and just say, you know what? If you don't want to show up to even defend yourself, why should I stick my neck out there to defend you when you're not even willing to defend yourself?
Yeah, there was a study done last year that showed the ratio of pro-Palestinian to pro-Israeli posts on TikTok was 19-1, and that the average view count for pro-Palestinian content was 5 times higher than pro-Israel content. And I think there could be a lot of reasons behind that statistic, but one of them seems to be that Israel and Israeli influencers weren't doing as good of a job of, promoting themselves, making those arguments. At the same time, though, Cardon, I don't know if this is me pushing back or wanting to get your thoughts from a different angle, because I wonder if like the medium is the message with platforms like TikTok, with Instagram Reels or whatever. Are they ever going to promote the nuanced, truthful version of the Latter-day Saint faith or something like this? Or are they always going to promote like the critical, inflammatory type of content? Like, I just wonder if the way that algorithms and these platforms make money is never going to be in a way that is enlightening or edifying or whatever. And so like the problem is social media, the actual system, as opposed to influencers just doing a better job making their case,
Okay. My answer to that is, so first off, you're right in the sense that social media generally has a tendency towards polemics, and the algorithm has a tendency to reward polemics. But all media has always been that way. Whether it was yellow journalism in the 20s and the 30s, or whether it was daytime television in the 80s and the 90s, or whether it was even Facebook in the Occupy Democrats era, okay? Things have always been that way. But Charlie Kirk was good at that, though. Like, that's why Charlie Kirk was so good, was because he was able to produce the volume and the quality Do you get what I'm saying? Like every week he was at a new campus. Every week he was interviewing a new 100 kids. And for each one of those 100 arguments, he had the rebuttal, whether it was Israel, whether it was the Civil War, whether it was slavery, whether it was the Civil Rights Act, whether it was voting rights, whether it was ID and voting. Like that dude was hitting it and just hitting it hard day after 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 day. So he was showing up in their feeds. He was effectively, I would say, the only counterbalance to all of the wokeism for 2 or 3 years straight. And nobody else has, I think conservatives are just too rich. Like, I think they're still just too, like, there's the older generation that has the money doesn't have the talent. And then the people that have the talent to Charlie Kirk it don't have the money. The big secret to Charlie Kirk's success, actually, and I had friends in politics that said this years ago in the GOP. Have you ever seen him fundraise live? Brigham, you ever seen it?
No.
Thing of beauty. The dude speaks boomer Reagan Republicanism and is bilingual in Gen Z talkery, whatever you want to call it. He would get up in front of wealthy boomers and talk about how we're going to change the world and change young hearts and minds and speak whatever corporate worm tongue they needed to hear so that they would write those $1 million, $2 million, $3 million checks. And then he would turn around and he'd hand it to his video team and his production team and say, now let's go do the college student tour. The real reason why he was so successful was not just because he was very good and he was very fast at debating. There's actually a lot of that talent out there, but not talent that has millions of dollars that can plan college tours to make it happen and then disseminate all of the conversations in a daily morphine drip on every single social media platform imaginable, while simultaneously creating chapters of his organization behind him in his wake. Like that was the magic of Charlie Kirk. And so, I think sometimes the medium is the message. You're right. But good academics are in the same problem. They live in a world where everything has to be peer reviewed and verified. So oftentimes lots of academics feel like they are above. We deal with this on our show all the time. There's plenty of B-tier academics that feel like they're above coming on Ward Radio or above coming on podcasts. Like they'll barely descend from the ivory tower of academia to do NPR, let alone new media, right? But one of my A-tier scholar friends who goes out on every podcast he can to publicize his works said, I disagree with that because in my mind, good academics have always been determined to be good because they were able to popularize their research as well as complete their research.
Yeah.
So, say something and I got more questions.
No, I mean, I just have a couple of figures that come to mind as you're talking about that. That in 2024, before the November presidential election, the Turning Point team around Charlie Kirk recorded 15 billion views of Charlie Kirk content. Just in those 11 months or whatever that had been viewed on TikTok, YouTube, or whatever. And then they commissioned a poll that showed that more than 2/3 of young voters recalled seeing Turning Point content during the election cycle. So in terms of like reach, they had almost saturated those social media platforms. And it's so interesting that you tie this back to Charlie Kirk, because the place where I end this story about the conservative civil war is you have some of these Gen Z conservative, Republican operatives based out of Washington, D.C. or Texas or here in Provo. And they say that Charlie Kirk is the model for this, and they need to be, quote, successors to Charlie Kirk in terms of being able to provide a very firm, clear account of what conservatism is and what it's not. And so I do think that that's kind of the positive alternative to what we've been describing today, is you need to make the arguments better, but also do it in a way that's more prolific, that has that same kind of traction on social media.
Okay, so who'd y'all interview? Who are the major players in Gen Z conservatism right now, and how are they disagreeing with each other?
Yeah. Great question. I mean, I'll start with the first name I mentioned during the podcast, which is Ryan Newhouse, and he's 31, so he's the younger end of millennial. But he was the chief of staff of Kevin Roberts at the Heritage Foundation, which has long been the most influential conservative think tank in Washington, D.C. And he wrote a video response for Kevin Roberts, the president of Heritage Foundation, defending Tucker Carlson's interview of Nick Fuentes. And this kind of blew up, and people were calling for Kevin Roberts to resign, and they lost scholars and donors. And amid all this, Ryan Newhouse, he resigns quietly. And then I was his first interview with a traditional news outlet after that happened, and that's highlighted in this story. And what he talked about is that kind of the theme of our conversation thus far is that the conservative movement needs to grapple with where Gen Z is going and the influencers that they are listening to without alienating all of them. And so that was kind of what he was willing to say on the record. He didn't necessarily want to talk about the whole Heritage Foundation blow up off the record. So that's one voice that kind of anchors, one side of the argument. And then you have this Aubrey Hudson, who's the chair of Turning Point USA for BYU students, not on campus though. And so that was another voice. And she came out strongly saying that if you are someone who aligns with Nick Fuentes, I don't think that you are conservative or should be a part of the conservative movement. And she was willing to say that clearly and bluntly, kind of draw the line there, as was Tyler Clancy, who's a name that if you don't know, you should know. He was the youngest, and I think still is the youngest state lawmaker in Utah. He was first elected when he was 25, and now he's 28, and he's about to become Governor Spencer Cox's advisor on homelessness in March. And so he is pretty influential within the state, but also he's constantly at these national conservatism events. He's on podcasts. He's very well connected among Gen Z conservatives, and he's that older end of Gen Z. And he made a similar argument there about having no place for Nick Fuentes within the movement. At the same time, he says that if young conservatives aren't able to afford a home and they aren't bought into our system and the American dream, then that's where radicalism is going to explode. And so these are kind of like the two sides of the argument there.
Yeah, that's great. He said it a lot more succinctly than I did in a 3-minute rant. He said in 30 seconds. I should learn from this guy. Okay, so who else is there? Who else do you interview that you think are big voices? And also, like, what are the major divisions? We've talked about Israel so far, but what are some other ways that they're... Yeah, because, I mean, the boomers, man, you'd think with boomer conservatives, Israel might as well be the 52nd state, behind, like, Puerto Rico. Okay? Like, the way these people talk, it's, one step above Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands, right? Whereas amongst Gen Z... You're right. It's at best 50-50. And the 50% that's supposedly on the pro side is still extremely dubious of like Bibi Netanyahu, the amount of money we spend and anything AIPAC touches, right? So it's almost like a false 50-50.
Yeah. So I mean, let me weigh in there before I talk about any other issues. So one person I talked to is Lexi Langley. She's a 23-year-old BYU grad and is a grassroots engagement director for Americans for Prosperity, which has long been, one of the big get out the vote kind of operations on the American right. And she's based out of Utah County. And I was just talking about general issues. And I wasn't asking kind of any leading questions. And she comes out with this quote that really surprised me, and people who read the article have kind of commented on it to me. She said that she doesn't know a single Gen Z that's pro-Israel. She said, all of my friends are questioning Israel. She said that it's the top issue they want to learn and understand. And for some reason, this country across on the other side of the world is super salient among this generation. And I think it's because it's emphasized so heavily by the influencers that they listen to. And the kind of charitable reading of that is that it represents this broader argument of America First, that we don't want American leaders, elected officials in bed with foreign governments or taking cues from foreign governments. And then the less charitable, kind of more cynical reading is that this is, kind of a scapegoat that could be leading to more negative feelings about people that are of Jewish ethnicity or religious backgrounds. And another name that I mentioned is Kai Schwemmer in the article. Yeah. He's a Latter-day Saint. He got back from his mission to Argentina in February. Yeah. An extremely bright kid. Viva Argentina. All right, rock on. He was a sterling scholar in high school, went to Highland High, and but before his mission, he built up an online following of like 20,000 on Instagram, TikTok, on streaming platforms. He also had an extensive like association with Nick Fuentes, like appearing at the same events, or talking on the same streams, debating, referencing each other on podcasts, and taking pictures together or whatever. Since he got home from his mission, he's kind of distanced himself from that. Says he doesn't identify as a so-called groyper, which is what Nick Fuentes acolytes call themselves. But in our conversations, and I really tried to just nail him down, not as like a gotcha type conversation, but to understand where is this segment of Gen Z on Israel and on Jewish people. And I just really wanted to understand his views clearly. And what he told me, and this was, a new perspective coming from Gen Z that I hadn't heard before, but I think that is very common and associated with anti-Semitism, by others, is that Jewish people, he said, are especially difficult to figure out where they figure into the American political experiment, because you can't be certain whether their motivations or their interests align with America First interests, because they are tied to that homeland in Israel. And so he's making that assumption that because they are Jewish, because they have that religious and ethnic identity tied to a certain place, and I guess to a government potentially in Israel, that they have to be seen through a different light. And so that was
Isn't that kind of like the old dual loyalties anti-Semite trope though? Like, and I don't think Kai's an anti-Semite, but like, I think you have to be very, very careful on how you word that, because also someday that could be used against Mormons. I'm very sensitive to anything that might come across as anti-Semitic, just because I see so much correlation between anti-Semitism and anti-Mormonism. And maybe it's just because I got brain damage from fighting anti-Mormons all day. It's like reformatted my hard drives, right? And I'm just like anathematizing anything that seems anti-religious. But like, I've sometimes wondered, like, I can't remember in what podcast it was, but somebody talked about the dual loyalties trope and anti-Semitism to like Ben Shapiro or something. And I can't remember if it was in a super chat or what it was, but somebody questioned, like, okay, would you fight for Israel or would you fight for the United States of America if the two went to war? Now, I don't see that happening anytime in the near future. It almost seems like one of those stupid hypotheticals that could only get you into trouble because it's never going to happen, right? But at the end of the day, it did get you kind of thinking like, okay, what is the hierarchy of loyalty in a religious man's mind who's very devout, similarly to how I would ask Mike Lee. Like, Mike, we're all fine with sending boys off on missions for 2 years, and then when they come back, off to the U.S. military, because, we're still kind of the righteous hand of God. We really still think, the Constitution's all, like inspired by God, and, America's still the good guy. Yeah, we got our problems, but it's still the good guy. It's like the crazy uncle, is crazy, but like, and he's got his flaws, but at the end of the day, he's got enough redeeming factors. We still invite him to Thanksgiving and stuff. Like, so there's still this kind of attitude in Mormonism that like, that's unimpeachably good U.S. military service, and it's unimpeachably good Mormon missionary service. But if the crap actually were to hit the fan, and Mormons were successfully vilified for long enough and hard enough, the anti-Mormonism took root in the same way that anti-Semitism has taken root. And there were another Mormon extermination order like there was in Missouri, for example. Well, now as a U.S. Senator, if push came to shove and somebody literally was sticking a gun to your head, who would you fight for? This newly formed nation of Deseret that's seceding from the American Union in order to provide religious freedom and physical protection for Mormons, or the U.S. government for which you are a senator? Mike Pence himself said, I am a Christian, a father, an American, and in that order, or whatever his phrase was, right? So I think it's fair to play like the mental mind games, or the thought experiments, better said, of like, what is the hierarchy of loyalty? But you want to steer as far away from sounding like, you're initiating the dual loyalties trope, or like the blood libel trope along the way. I think Kai's good enough to do that.
I mean, you're hearing this more commonly from folks like Tucker Carlson, and I think there's certainly room for debate about dual citizenship, whether that poses a problem or something that is not preferable. Lots of countries around the world don't allow for dual citizenship. But like you said, this is a slippery slope, or, kind of a place you want to be very careful, because if back in 1903, there was a senator who was a Latter-day Saint, Reed Smoot, right? And he spent the next 4 years going through committee hearings where they raked him over the coals. They subpoenaed all this information. Joseph F. Smith talked to the Senate about the church and whether Reed Smoot could be trusted as a U.S. senator because he was also an apostle of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or whether his loyalty or whether his religious identity precluded him from being a part of the American project, right? And so we've been on the other end of this, and something, I don't know if we're wrapping up here, but something I always like to re-up, a super interesting poll result from Pew back from 2023, and I sent this graphic to you. It's the really big table with the blue and yellow checkerboard.
I got it. Yeah.
And I'm sure that you've seen this before, but it just shows that among all of the religious groups in the United States, Latter-day Saints are viewed one of the least favorably. If you actually look at all Americans, we are viewed least favorably among religious groups.
Only it's 15%, brutal, dude. It's
only 15%.
Brutal.
Yeah, only 15% of Americans have a favorable view towards Latter-day Saints, but Latter-day Saints have the most favorable views toward all other religious groups, including Jews, where there's a plus 58, like a positive 58 margin in terms of approval from Latter-day Saints toward Jewish people, which is by far the largest, favorability toward Jews by any group. And anyways, and so if there was a group that would be, demonized or scapegoated, it's not too out of the realm of possibility that it would be Latter-day Saints, right?
Yeah, I really like Kai, and I think he's a good dude, and I got to get him on the program because
you should.
He's got some interesting views, like especially on like what is appropriate for government to do. Like he's not a fan of libertarianism. Which he used to be. He started out as a libertarian. And that's actually a very interesting break. Like, I really feel that, like, boomer conservatism, like Reagan era and McConkie era conservatism is very libertarian. But, like, Gen Z conservatism is not. Like, it is not the live and let live libertarian kind of hippie party, shall we say. As long as we all balance our budgets, who cares if we smoke weed in the central square or whatever, like it's not that brand. And Kai is like one of the biggest defenders of that specific brand. I've wanted to pick his brain and get his thoughts on that. I'll have to invite him on the show. I do see we're in overtime now. It's fine though, because you're so intelligent. I'll abuse you. Tell me if we have to go. I gotta know. We've covered Israel. We covered many ways that Gen Z's breaking from traditional conservatism. But then I saw the quote here where it says, is Gen Z more conservative? Talks about the viral interview with with Kirk. And then a shift among voters that was huge was feeling like, it says, explanations for the shift among the nation's youngest voters include a reaction to restrictive measures taken during COVID, making them more skeptical, and then also feeling like the American dream is out of reach. Boy, do I identify with the latter. I think half the reason why so many people think Nick Fuentes is funny is because Gen Z has the darkest humor on the planet. And they are all internet trolls. Do you remember when Mountain Dew released a poll and a voting mechanism to choose their next flavor? Do you remember that?
No.
Mountain Dew did not understand Gen Z. This happened about a decade ago, and it was actually younger millennials too. But they, on their website, said, we've built this coded thing where you can suggest a flavor for our new Mountain Dew flavor that we've developed, and the biggest number of votes wins. So all the internet trolls came out, and I think the top flavor that was getting voted for was like Hitler did nothing wrong. It was something like just, it was like every racial trope and anti-Semitic trope. Like it was just like this, like I'm afraid to say even what it was because the YouTube algorithm will just like Donkey Kong stomp me and just take down my stream, right? So it was something super heinous, and Mountain Dew realized we don't have a mechanism for deleting this entry. And it's racking up just tens of, it's out on 4chan and on, not even on Facebook, because Facebook was passé by then, you know, but it's out on Snapchat. Go and vote for this, go and vote for this. And all of these traditional boomer conservatives I knew were just aghast at how racist Gen Z was. And I had to stop him and tell him, I'm like, no, guys, no. It's the shock value of watching you all clutch your pearls that is motivating this. Actual Semitism and belief that Hitler did nothing wrong is not what's floating their boat. It's watching you guys freak out and spin in circles and, run in circles trying to stop. That's what's the entertaining part. So like learn from this and don't give that to them next time. But also they wouldn't be thinking this was funny if they felt they had access to the mainstream, but they don't feel like they have access to the mainstream. They feel like corporations are screwing them. So when they can screw back corporations by doing things like mess with their website and make it say Hitler did nothing wrong, so they could take screenshots and then post it on Twitter, like that's the relationship you get after 20 years of corporations screwing freaking Gen Z. So I don't know a Gen Z person that is hopeful of buying a house and starting a family in the same neighborhood and the same size as the family they came from. It's just like not part of the Gen Z equation anymore. Do you think that's fair? What was you got your ear to the train tracks. What are you feeling?
So the journalist in me wants to give the two sides. That I feel like sometimes it comes across as a deflection, but that's what I'm best at in my job, is saying this is what one side says, this is what the other. And so those economic tectonic plates, they are real, and they are determining a real reaction. So I was raised in Heber Valley, Utah. The median home price in Heber in Wasatch County is $1 million. That's the median home price in Wasatch County, Utah. And to afford that home, I'd need to be making, I don't know how many multiplications of what I'm making right now, right? Yeah. And so like there are real factors that make Gen Z 20 to 30 percentage points more pessimistic about the American dream, according to polls. So this is like something that definitely shows up in the statistics. At the same time, I do think that there's another, systemic, to use a phrase that's often used on the left, systemic factor that's shaping some of these views. And that is that social media is catered to feed people a more cynical view of reality, because there are just as many economic factors you could look to say, oh, this is the best time to raise a family in U.S. history. Oh, religious freedom is at its greatest point in U.S. history, right? And my wife is able to stay at home. I'm able to be the sole breadwinner. We have 3 kids. Like, we're making it work, right? This is something that can be done if your culture is strong, if your religious values are strong. You're not determined to, be a basement dweller watching Nick Fuentes forever. And, one positive note that I'll end on is Aubrey Hudson, this chair of the Turning Point USA chapter for BYU students. She had this experience where serving her mission in Washington, D.C., she always wanted to be in politics, so she thought it was funny she was sent to Washington, D.C. and couldn't talk about politics. Yeah. But she said but she said that while being there for those 18 months and then coming back to BYU, her positions didn't change on the issues. Her positions didn't soften. But what changed was that she was able to touch grass and place politics within its true context, right? Which is like this proper perspective of seeing everyone as children of God, regardless of the religion, ethnicity, background, or whatever. And just having that, I think, as your foundation as a member of Gen Z allows you to be much more discerning, I think, of the social media world that we've grown up in.
Dude, man. Okay. And then last question is, we've talked a lot about the dark outlook on Gen Z. Was there anything that was really positive in all of your research of this that gave you a lot of hope and you thought this could really turn it around for Gen Z?
I think that Gen Z conservatives, this wasn't a poll that I research for this story or a question that I asked, but something I've seen through conversations and other reporting is they are extremely skeptical of social media. Right? I've talked a lot about how social media is playing such a major role, but so many Gen Z parents I talk to are like, my kid's never getting social media. They're not getting a smartphone until they're 16, not getting social media until they're out of the house or whatever. So I think there is a little bit of jadedness or a maturity when it comes to internet literacy that Gen Z has because they were raised in the age of the iPhone. And so I think one thing that is hopeful is, having been raised in this environment, Gen Z will want their children to touch grass and base their political opinions off of those real world experiences and not on social media trolls. So, and that's a hope I have. I don't know if we know whether that will be the case or not.
I share your observation that I think Gen Z is the first generation that has truly contextualized the internet. Like, they don't really fear cancellation as much because they recognize that cancellation goes away. Boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials, they're mortified of what somebody like Ward Radio might say about them on the internet. They're mortified of like what John DeLynn might say, or whereas like Gen Z guys are like, oh, like YouTube channel, like 1 million subs, like did a hit piece on you? Wow, that's horrible, bro. You gonna come and play basketball tonight? Like they're just, they do not care because they have the sensory overload of the internet and they're like, whatever, that's fine. Tomorrow's a new day, which actually I think is very healthy in an interesting way. Like the internet finally came full circle in Gen Z. And that is a fringe benefit of so much internet, is now you don't give it so much power. So, okay, I know, gosh, it's an hour ahead there in Utah and you're going to have to jam. But where can people find you? How can they gobble up everything that you're throwing down, man? How can they subscribe to you, know more, the whole 9 yards? Where can people find you, bro?
Deseret News homepage. You'll see my stuff there most days, and I'll just make a pitch that Deseret News is trying to elevate the national conversation, during a time where so many news outlets are jumping on that controversy and the polarization. I think if you read my piece on Gen Z conservatives, or, I'll just share one quick experience. I have another close relative. I'm like using my family as my focus group, right, of America, who is very, very progressive, not a fan of the church. They read my profile of Charlie Kirk and they said they didn't know where I stood on him, right? They had no idea whether I was conservative, liberal, whether I liked him or hated him. And so if you read this piece, I'm going to let you make up your mind on what you think Gen Z conservatives are up to. But hopefully it elevates the conversation and leaves you feeling, hopeful about what Gen Z conservatives and also conservatives who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are bringing to the table. So.
Dude, this was absolutely awesome. All right, before we go, I just realized I've neglected super chats here really fast. I'm just going to read a couple of these before we jam, so I'm not neglecting our fans here who've been super generous with their time and their energy. Dragon Slayer says, liberal, conservative, that doesn't matter as much as having temple rocks. Only those with the rocks are truly based. Hope we figure out where they are. That's funny, dude. Thank you so much, Dragon Slayer, coming in for us every live stream, dude. This guy's like a total stud. And he apparently sent me these temple rocks. I got to freaking find these things, dude. I'm like stressed out that this temple rocks joke that's been a meme in our channel for so long, it was like lost in the mail or something. Like, what the heck? Anyway, Ryan Anderson says, it's impossible for me to pick a side, to be honest. They all dislike Mormons. My politics are Jesus, baby. I agree with you. There's this fun podcast called the Iron Rod Cast, where he ends every one of his shows like, it's all about Jesus, baby. And I think that actually Gen Z is also far more independent. The lines between liberal and conservative are a little bit more blurred now. So love thy neighbor and all that. Oh, the Iron Rod Cast. Oh, that's funny. I mentioned the Iron Rodcast without finishing reading the rest of the super chat, and it's the Iron Rodcast. Okay, now the Iron Rodcast. Oh my gosh, dude, is this a commercial for the Iron Rodcast? Gives a third super chat. Says listening to Nick more than you read your scriptures is hilarious, and that's what Gen X conservatives are doing. That's why, quote, Mormons will stay on top. I definitely agree with that. Something I have said in multiple lessons is I think there's people in this room that listen to Ben Shapiro more often than they listen to General Conference talks, and that they read the Daily Wire more than they read the Book of Mormon, and like that should not be. And so I am right there with the Iron Rodcast. He gets a heart. That was awesome. So Brigham, thanks for hanging out with us, man. You're an absolute stud, but you need to update your picture on Deseret News. I like your new haircut more than your old haircut, bro. Like we got to get you, we got to get that updated. You got some, you got some lovely locks, dude. And here it's looking really, really short. So we're gonna have to get you a new picture. But his name's Brigham Tomko. The show, not the show, but the publication is Deseret News. Thanks for hanging out with us, guys. If you want to support the channel, you've got only a couple of days left to order your War in Heaven veteran hats and merch so it can arrive before Christmas if that's what you're going for. If you want to contribute to the channel, please consider a donation to us, a tax-deductible donation. We are actually a 501c3. It's going to be announced very shortly here. So if you would like to contribute to the program, please make sure that you reach out to us, and we'd love to receive your assistance, shall we say. If not, you guys can also go to the website and buy a shirt. We've got all the cool merch in the Ward Radio gift shop. So it's been real, and it's been fun, and it's been real fun for this and more. Please make sure you guys check us out at wardradio.com.